Hi there. Welcome to Studio Movie Recap. Today we're going to recap historical drama film, 12 Years a Slave. The movie begins with a group of slaves learning how to cut sugarcane. After working the whole day they were served food to eat. The movie transitions and shows Solomon Northup, the man who was deceived and sold into slavery. He notices some blackberry juice on his food and had idea to make ink with the berry juice. Unfortunately his plan does not succeed as the juice turns out too thin for use. Later on, within the cramped slave quarters, one woman awakens from her sleep and approaches Northup. Since she has sexual needs, she uses Solomon's hands to satisfy herself. This encounter triggers flashbacks of happier times when he was still married and had children before being sold into slavery. He is a highly skilled violinist and widely sought-after performer in his hometown of Saratoga. After putting their children to bed, he chats playfully with his wife, who will soon head off to work as a cook, jokingly expressing envy at not being able to taste her cooking that night. The next morning, he bids farewell to his family as they leave in a carriage. They were going to meet again after 2 days. In the afternoon while out, Solomon runs into an acquaintance who introduces him to two travelers named Brown and Hamilton. They couldn't stop admiring him for being known as the best violinist in town, so they wanted to hire him for the upcoming circus show that will be held in Chicago. They offer him a huge amount of money if he accepts their offer and go with them to Washington, D.C. They promised him that they'll return before his wife comes back home from work. Intrigued by the proposition, he agreed without hesitation. Later on in Washington, D.C. at a restaurant, the two travelers gave Solomon more money than they promised him. Solomon was very happy and thought of them as friends since they were good people. They enjoy a glass of wine together, with one person keeps refilling Solomon's wine glass so he can drink more. Everyone was in high spirits and having a great time. Suddenly, Solomon finds himself waking up in a damp prison cell with chains securing him to the floor. Through several quick memories from the past, we witness his so-called friends escorting him back to his hotel room they left with him from the restaurant by making excuse for his drunken state, so no one suspected anything. Brown urgently advises Hamilton that they are running out of time and need to wrap things up quickly. The flashback ends abruptly, bringing us back to Solomon confined in the harsh jail cell. Solomon's captors appear. They told him that he has been deemed as an escaped slave from Georgia. Despite shouting and wanting his freedom back, they didn't let him leave. They told him he was no longer a freeman. They own him. Since Solomon was not obedient, they decided to punish him and show him that he does not have any rights. They aggressively whipped his back with a whip until his flash was popped open. Later, one of his captors brought him a new shirt to wear so he can cover his back wounds. They took him to join other slaves to clean themselves and prepare to be sold. Solomon became friends with one of the slaves named Clemens, a seemingly intelligent slave who informs him of how serious their situation was. Soon after, a captured boy is brought to the pen. A mother named Eliza and daughter are also brought there. At midnight, while everyone is asleep, the slaves were ready to shipped. They are taken out of their prison cell at night, chained, and put on a riverboat. Inside the boat, Clemens gave Solomon important advice that he should keep a low profile and hide his intelligence and the fact that he can read and write, or they will kill him. Later that night, a slaver visits and awakens Eliza to rape her. Robert attempts to stop the rape but is stabbed and killed. Clemens and Solomon were forced to dump his body in the sea. This prompts Clemens to comment that Robert is better off dead than being in their situation. Eventually, they reach a dock where Clemens's master demanded his stolen property back immediately, which was Clemens. Without hesitation, Clemens ran into his master's arms and abandoned Solomon. Unfortunately for Solomon, he has now lost his only friend and had no one. Once they disembarked from their journey, slaver Freeman was giving everyone their new slave identity, including names. When he refers to Solomon as Platt, he was stubborn and didn't answer. He said his name is Solomon and is a husband and a father of 2 kids. Angered by this denial of identity, Solomon receives a slap across the face. It was the time for Freeman's slave operation exhibition to sell slaves to potential buyers. He forced them to bathe in buckets naked outside his office. After that, he lined them up naked to show off how healthy they looked so he can sell them with higher price. Freeman smoothly delivers a persuasive sales pitch to eager customers. Among them is Ford, a well-mannered plantation owner who shows interest in Platt and Eliza. Desperate, Eliza pleads with Ford to also take her children along. But Freeman refuses and quickly sells her son off to another buyer without hesitation. As a result of this heartbreaking situation for Eliza, she becomes overwhelmed by sorrow and unleashes wild screams that disrupt the ongoing sale process. Solomon receives a command to play violin in order to uplift everyone's spirits. Ford transports his purchases back home, while Eliza remains tearful throughout the journey. Ford's wife suggests that they eat food and rest to get ready to work the following day. The following morning, Tybeats, a slave handler, is introduced to the slaves along with Chapin, who oversees them on behalf of Ford. As they work on chopping timber, Tybeats spitefully sings a mocking song cautioning them against escape attempts. Despite this discouragement, they persist in their labor until coming across some native people whom they briefly interact with and enjoy respite alongside them for a short period of time. The following day, Solomon broke Clement's advice to not show his intelligence. He approaches Ford with a brilliant idea to transport the timber using the river. Tybeats didn't believe the plan would work since it came from a slave. He believed slaves were dumb. He disliked him for acting smart. Ford was impressed by Solomon's idea and told him to gather other slaves and manage. The plan turns out to be successful, leading Tybeats to feel embarrassed, as he said Solomon's plan would never work. As a token of gratitude for Solomon's intelligence, Ford offers Solomon a violin as a reward. Meanwhile, at the slave quarters later that day, Eliza expresses her deep sadness over losing her children through mournful sounds. This noise frustrates Solomon, who engages in a debate with Eliza about whether they can truly survive under Ford's decent treatment, considering their circumstances as slaves. He told her he's doing his best to survive. The following day, Tybeats seeks revenge on Solomon and confronts him. He demanded him to take off his clothes so he can discipline him. Solomon didn't obey him. He refused. This led to a fight between him and his master. Ironically, instead of Tybeats punishing Solomon, it was the other way around. Solomon was the one beating up Tybeats, releasing all his anger on him. Chapin arrives at the scene and stops the fight. Tybeats threatened to return and kill Solomon for what he has done. Later that day, Tybeats gathered a group of men who took Solomon and tied him up. They place a noose around his neck and hanged him on the tree, pulling the rope so he can die horrifically. Chapin returns with a gun and commands them to stop. He managed to scare them away but allows Solomon to remain hung on the tree in an uncomfortable position where he can barely support his weight with tiptoes. He did this to punish him for striking a white man. A cautious woman silently ran to him and offers him water, then quickly ran away before she was in trouble. After what feels like hours, Ford finally returns and cuts Solomon's ropes to set him free. Ford liked Solomon and didn't want him to die, so he wanted to sell him to another slave master to prevent Tybeats from getting him killed. Solomon begged to stay, but he couldn't since his life was in danger there. Solomon was sold to a notorious plantation owner named Epps, infamous for brutal beatings of enslaved people. Epps reads for the slaves scripture in the Bible that says if slaves don't obey his orders, they should be severely punished with a whip. The following day, the slaves started working. They were picking cotton under scorching conditions. As evening approaches, the weight of each worker's harvested cotton is recorded. Solomon's yield falls below average as he was tired because of not getting enough rest. If slaves picked less than the previous day, they would receive beating as punishment. However, Patsy stands out by far, exceeding the best production record of any other worker. Epps is visibly infatuated with her and consistently praises her abilities. This made Epps' wife to hate Patsy. One night, Epps enters the slave quarters and wakes everyone up in the middle of the night to make them dance for him. Patsy became the center of attention. In a fit of anger towards Patsy's popularity and Epps' favoritism, his wife took a heavy whiskey glass and threw it to Patsy's face, causing severe scars. She insists that Epps sells off Patsy, but he denies her wife's request, claims that he would rather send away his own wife before selling someone as valuable as Patsy. Mistress Epps tasks Solomon with running an errand to the store and hands him a list. She notices that he is reading it, which prompts her to warn him not to do so again or he will be punished. As Solomon makes his way towards the store, he came up with an idea of escaping. He ran to the bushes but then unexpectedly stumbles upon a lynching incident. The white man saw him and called him, defended himself by saying he is sent to the store by Miss Epps. They let him go. While doing so, he witnessed two men being hanged for trying to escape, which breaks his spirit, causing him to abandon any thoughts of escaping and proceed with his original task. While at the store, Solomon comes up with an idea after seeing some spare sheets of paper, collecting them in order to eventually compile a letter for communication purposes. Over time, Mistress Epps instructs Solomon to go on another mission. This time being sent by Mr. Shaw, a nearby plantation owner, who has married one of his slaves. Upon arriving at Shaw's plantation where Patsy was visiting, Solomon informs her that her master wants her back as soon as possible. They instructed Platt to relax and take a break. After a short break they went back to their master. At that time Epps was drunk. To save Patsy, Solomon whispered to her that she should just leave. Epps saw this and interpreted it as Solomon's trying to pressure her to have sex with him. Epps calls him so he can stab him. Solomon disobeyed him and ran. He chased him. Epps got angrier when he fell while chasing Platt and blamed him for it. After a drunken chase in the yard, Mrs. Epps intervenes, only to express her disgust for her husband's obsession with Patsy. Later that night, Epps stumbled to the slave quarters and took Patsy outside. He raped her the whole night. Later that night, Patsy begged Solomon to strangle her and dispose of her body to relieve herself from the misery. She no longer can take Epps' rape and his wife's beating. Despite her pleas, Solomon refuses. After some time, it becomes apparent that Epps's cotton crops have suffered significant damage from insects, compelling him to offer his slaves assistance to a judge who can utilize their skills and help pay off the mortgage for their purchase. This leads us back to the initial scene where Solomon is seen cutting sugarcane again. The judge recognizes Solomon's talent and recommends him to a neighbor in need of music for an upcoming party. Adding on, the judge kindly informs Solomon that he may keep any wages earned during this event. As fate would have it, the event turns out to be an extravagant masked celebration where Solomon cannot ignore how closely it resembles his past life as a free man contrasted against his present state of forced slavery. After the party ends, it was time for everyone to return to Epps's farm. As Solomon approaches the house, he notices Patsy's bloodied eye, which indicates that her sufferings have not stopped. The cotton harvest has been completed and now they must go back to working in the fields. This time, a white laborer named Armsby joins them as he wants to earn some money and get back on his feet. Despite having a significantly lower yield compared to others, Armsby is spared from receiving the whipping punishment like all other slaves do. Inside their living quarters, Armstrong tends kindly to Solomon's wounds while opening up about his own story. He appears decent-hearted and understanding towards Solomon's struggles. Feeling somewhat hopeful about him, Solomon decides to trust him and take a chance by entrusting Armsby with sending a letter north. Hoping this could possibly lead him towards gaining freedom, he gave him all of his earnings he earned from the party and handed them over to Armsby, along with a strict instruction not to reveal this secret that he can write. A promise is made that he will receive the letter in 2 days' time. Solomon begins the task of creating ink and writing the letter. However, on that very night, Epps unexpectedly approaches Solomon's living quarters and escorts him outside. It turns out that Armsby has betrayed their agreement and told Epps everything beforehand. Fortunately for Solomon, he cleverly seizes upon Epps's negative perception of slaves and swiftly alters the narrative against Armsby, branding him as an untrustworthy liar who seeks personal gain so he can get employment opportunities. Solomon managed to get away and was saved from being hanged or getting punished. Later on, Solomon, deeply disappointed, he lost all hope for escaping, so he proceeds with burning up the written letter. Later on, a group of workers started constructing a structure alongside Bass, who was hired to assist. Despite their differing opinions on slavery, with Bass strongly against it, they engage in discussions that capture Solomon's attention. Soon after, Epps becomes deeply agitated regarding the disappearance of Patsy and suspects she has escaped. Filled with anger over her loss, he threatens all the women with violence as punishment, unaware that Patsy had simply visited her friend at Shaw's plantation instead. She came back and tried to justify herself by explaining that she went there not just for companionship, but also to acquire some soap, which was continuously denied by his wife. Epps reaches breaking point and demands for Patsy to be bound tightly onto the whipping post so he can punish her. As he gets ready to attack, he realizes that he lacks the ability to beat her. Cowardly, he insists that Solomon take over. Initially, Solomon tries to be gentle, but Mistress Epps easily sees through his act and encourages her husband to increase the severity of punishment. Epps holds a gun against Solomon's head and threatens him with killing every slave in sight if he does not whip Patsy harder. Solomon obeys by inflicting stronger strikes on her, while each strike releases a misty spray of blood. When there is a momentary pause in whipping, Epps angrily rushes forward and takes matters into his own hands by brutally lashing at Patsy until her flesh rips apart, causing her to collapse. Solomon found himself in solitude, accompanied only by Bass, the hired hand. Curiosity arose within him and he asked about Bass's origin. When the response came as Canada, Solomon demonstrated an impressive depth of knowledge regarding that particular country. Puzzled by this unexpected awareness, Bass inquired how Solomon gained such extensive travel experience. Bass asked him how he got there, so he explained to him. Bass felt empathy for him. As they continued their work together diligently on various tasks at hand, an opportunity presented itself before Solomon. He requested help with writing letters addressed to Saratoga, his hometown. Though uncertain about whether taking this chance would prove fruitful, Solomon gathered courage yet again to ask him. Casting aside any hesitation, Bass agreed without wanting anything in return. A group of men can be observed tilling the soil and planting seeds. At that moment, a carriage arrives at Epps' plantation and an individual with an authoritative appearance calls out for Solomon. Solomon promptly responds to the call and approaches the man, who is actually a sheriff. The law enforcement officer proceeds to ask him some questions to make sure he's really Solomon Northup. He saw Mr. Parker, a shop owner from Saratoga who's also Solomon's friend. This action infuriates Epps, who starts shouting empty threats in frustration. Patsy calls him. Solomon couldn't leave without saying goodbye to her. He gave her one final embrace before leaving. He walks away, and Patsy collapses in tears. Solomon had now been brought inside his house. He is filled with emotion as he stands outside his door after being rescued from his nightmare. He sees his family as soon as he walks in. Despite being 12 years older, they were shocked to see him. The son of his daughter and her husband is known as Solomon Northup. They surround him and welcome him home as tears stream down their faces. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe and turn on your notification bell for more content.